Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today we are looking at part 2 of the Common Tagging Errors series of webinars. Don't worry if you missed the first part, that is available on the knowledge base and on YouTube, so we can direct you there if you did miss it. My name is Tom Jeffrey. I'm one of the Education and Media Technicians at CaseWare UK. I'm joined by Phil Reeves, another EMT technician who's going to be taking you through the presentation. We've also got Les Horsley, EMT consultant, in the background on hand to answer any questions because we have quite a large turnout today. So in terms of questions, if you have any, you can pop those in the question field on the GoToWebinar control panel. You can also use the hand raising feature, which we've started using recently. So if you wanted to ask your question live via your microphone, then you can use the hand raising feature there. I'll send you an unmute request and you can ask the question live. Otherwise, use the question field there. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. And if we don't get back to you during the session, we'll email you with a follow-up afterwards. And we'll also produce a Q&A document that will go with a recording of the webinar, and we'll upload that to the knowledge base and to YouTube. So we are recording the webinar today as well. So I'll pass you over to Phil and we'll get started.
Cheers, thank you, Tom. And yeah, thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. So today is our Common Tagging Errors part 2. And today we're going to be looking at some of the manual areas, so the manually tagged areas throughout the account. So areas such as subsidiary undertakings, related party transactions, controlling party, and also we're going to have a Q&A. Now, this is very much a follow-on from the first part of this webinar series, so we're not going to be looking at all the things to do with Company's House, or whether you're selecting Company's House or HMRC. We're going to focus more on these areas specifically, and some of the errors or some of the messages that appear when our users look to manually tag these notes in particular. Now, the reason why we're focusing on these 3 areas is simply as a result of the poll which we ran in the first Common Tagging Errors webinar. And as you can see, over 60% of the people that attended the first webinar wanted to focus on the related party transactions, but that doesn't mean we're not going to have a look at the other ones as well. During that webinar, we saw that 3% of people said other. Now, we didn't receive any kind of recognition from anyone as to what other areas they'd like to see. So if you were one of those people that did put other in the first webinar, feel free to drop into the question field what you would like us to, or what you'd like to see in terms of tagging other areas of the accounts and other manually tagged areas that do often or do sometimes cause you problems when you go to run the iXBRL submission. Now, just before we start, we just want to ask the question, why? Why are we having to manually tag these areas? Now, with the subsidiary undertakings, it will be slightly different. As we'll see, the majority of the time was with the subsidiary undertakings. The reason you'd have to manually tag any part of it is just because you've included more detail than is included by default. With the related party transaction and the controlling party note, these notes are actually just input notes. So CaseWare will provide you with a green input text area where you can insert any information that is related to your related party transactions or your controlling parties. And within these sections, you would insert things like cells for figures that might relate to an amount owed to a related party or a payment from the related party. And with these cells, because they're always different on every set of accounts, CaseWare will not automatically tag them. It means that you would have to go through and apply manual tagging, which can obviously sometimes the manual tagging might not be correct, or there might be, you might put the incorrect context or the incorrect numeric, and this can sometimes cause a warning message to appear. So what we're going to do today is just focus on those particular notes. Now, Tom has kindly put together a handout for us. It's very similar to the handout we saw in the first part. It contains a couple of knowledge-based articles and also a link to our iXBRL Getting Started guide. So Tom, if you can make that available to everyone, that would be smashing.
Yeah, so that's in the handout section of the control panel there, so you can click on the PDF to download it from the control panel.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. So what we're going to focus more on today is just the iXBRL diagnostics. Now, this is just an overview of what we covered in the first webinar, but we're going to be looking at specific tagging errors. These can be related to tags, context, or numerics, and we're going to see an example of all three of those during today's webinar. And we're also going to be having a look at warning icons which can appear on the notes that we're looking at. The information, as I said the other day, or in the last webinar, isn't anything you need to worry about. These are just information pieces of or tags that may appear twice or may be similar, duplicates, for example, and you can ignore those to submit your iXBRL submission. So firstly, we're going to focus on the related party transaction note. This is obviously the most popular one amongst those that watched our first webinar. And on the screen, you're just going to see some of the tag or some of the error messages that are quite common with the related party transaction note, and some of the error messages that our support team get phone calls on. So we're going to look at how you can resolve these. Probably the most common ones are to do with items representing information over a period is using a context associated with a specific date, and the opposite to that, item representing information over a period, at a specific date is using a context associated with the duration. So what I'm going to do at this stage is just switch over to a CaseWare file. I'll just wait for that to load up. And you should now be able to see just a standard example of a related party transaction note that we put together just for this demonstration period. Now, we've got two related parties, Total IT Limited and Simply Software Limited. And within those, we've got a couple of payments to the related party and a couple of amounts owed from the related party. And we're just going to look at some of the common errors that appear as a result of manually tagging these sections. So all I'm going to do is just go in and generate the iXBRL. If anyone's unsure of the process of generating the iXBRL, then I would recommend you have a look at the first common tagging errors webinar, or have a look at our knowledge base. So just going to go through HMRC, and we're just going to select a file location. Just going to save this on the desktop, call it webinar part 2. And just click the export button. Now, as I export this, what we should see is these are purposely inserted error messages, which are quite common, as I said, in this section. And what we're going to just go through is how to resolve each of these error messages, and also how to avoid these error messages from occurring. Now, the first one, a unit of measure currency in this circumstance, was not specified for monetary tag payments to related parties. Now, in this circumstance, what it's telling us is that we haven't set the correct numeric for a tag that we've inserted. And it's telling us that the tag should be using or relates to a monetary value. However, obviously the numeric isn't a monetary value. So now if I click the correct button, this relates to our 65,000. Just wait for that to load up on your screens. And we can see that the tag is correct. It's grayed, got the grey highlight around it. So we've got payments to related parties. And we can also see that our context is correct. So this is our first related party. So we're using the entity controlled by key management personnel 1. And this figure actually relates to the active period. So we've got the active period context. Now, as you can see, the issue is clearly related to numeric because we're currently using a numeric of no units of measure. But this is clearly a figure, so £65,000. Therefore, our numeric needs to relate to a monetary value. So all we need to do is click the numeric drop down and just make sure that it relates to the reporting currency. So anytime you've got figures that are a monetary value within any of your custom content, It's just important to make sure that when you're tagging it, you use the reporting currency numeric. We can then click OK, and that will clear that message off. Just wait for that to respond. There we go. Okay, so our second message, as I said, this is probably one of the most common ones. So item representing information over a period is using the context associated with a specific date. This is something that we covered in the first part of this webinar, so I won't spend too much time on it. But if I correct this, essentially this issue is related to the context. So as you can see, our numeric reporting currency is correct. This is £10,000. So we need to make sure that numeric is related to a currency. The tag is correct. This is again a payment to a related party. So we purchased £10,000 worth of goods in the prior year. The issue is related to the context. Now our context, the first part is correct. It's the entity controlled by key management personnel 1. This is our first related party, so that part's correct. It's actually the prior period end date section of the context that's incorrect. Now, because these purchases took place across the entire period, rather than just on a specific date, we want to make sure that this context relates to that entire period and not just at the end date. Generally, where you see the end date context, that is telling us that we are referring to maybe like the balance sheet will always use the end date because it's referring to a specific date in time. And if we're referring to a period, we need to make sure that our context relates to that or shows that appropriately. So all you would need to do is just make sure that you're using just the prior period context rather than the prior period end date. So if I select the prior period, so now this figure is related to the entire prior period, not just a single date, and click OK, and CaseWare is going to remove that second error message. There we go. So now we've got just the 2 error messages remaining. This one, so item representing information at a specific date is using a context associated with a duration, is pretty much the complete opposite of what we've just seen. So whereas the 10,000 is a figure over the period, this 20,000 is actually an amount outstanding at the end of the prior year. So on the last day of the prior year, we owed Total IT Limited £20,000. So therefore, our context in this case should relate to the end date rather than the entire period. So if you've got anything tagged to balances, amounts owed to related party, or balances, amounts owed by the related party, these are relating to the end of the periods, and therefore the context should be prior period, end date. So just load that back up for you. Before we add prior period or entity controlled by key management personnel 1 prior period, and all we're doing is selecting the one that relates to the end date. Again, our numeric's fine because it's a monetary value, got the reporting currency. So I can click OK to that. And that again should clear that issue. Now our last severe or serious tagging issue, which is obviously stopping us from exporting. If you ever see the cross, as we said in the first part of this 2 webinar series, if you ever see the cross, you can't export the iXBRL. It looks very similar to the second issue that we resolved, but actually if I go in to correct this, you can see that this is an income from related party, therefore we should expect it to see the context over the active period, and also our numeric is correct. So it would make you wonder why we're receiving this error message. Now this is one again that I've gone in and purposely created just to show you for this demonstration for purposes, but it is quite common if you've got more than the standard or more than the number of key management personnel that CaseWare provides tags for. Now, as you can see, if I open up the context window, CaseWare provides tags for the active period and prior period for 3 management personnel. But obviously, in some circumstances, you've got more than 3 related parties. You might have 4, 5, 6. You could have 100 if you wanted to, or if you had that many related party transactions. And if you've got more than 3, that's where you need to go through and start creating your own contexts to show the level of detail that's required. Now, we won't go through in too much detail creating context today, simply because we want to go through as many of these error messages as possible. But if that's something that you guys want to see, so us go through and create tags and stuff, please feel free to drop a comment in the question field, and we can always add another, or produce another webinar that goes through in a lot more detail creating contexts. Now, if this is the case that you've created your own context and you're receiving this error message, it's generally because the context you created is incorrect. Now, if I click the edit button just on the right hand side, this will show me more detail about the iXBRL context that's been created. Now, in this case, what we need to focus on is just this reporting date section. So this is what is picking up that active period information. Now, what we can see is the period's correct is active period, but applicable is to the end of the period, which means that, again, it's picking up an end date. What you instead you would need to do is set this up to be to the full period. Again, to the full period is to cover the entire 12 months that this set of accounts is reporting on. So if I change that to the full period and click OK, and then click OK again, that is going to clear that error message. So if you are creating your own contexts for any piece of information, again, it's important just to make sure that you use the correct to the period, or to the full period, or to the end of the period. Now, a final message on this section is just to tag the information as non-numeric, however, a unit of measure has been assigned. Now, you can choose, with any warning, you can choose to ignore it. I can click the export button if I want to, but we're just going to show you how to correct this. So if I click correct, it's simply because the total IT limited cell has got a numeric of reporting currency, and obviously this particular piece of information isn't a figure at all. So all you need to do is just change the numeric to no units and measure. If I click OK to that, I could then go through and I can ignore the informational tag. The reporting currency flip values will almost always duplicate the reporting currency, simply because when you submit something to HMRC or Companies House, everything gets submitted as positives. So things like your creditors will be a positive creditor value, but on the tag it will be a reporting currency flipped numeric. So I could go through at this stage and export my iXBRL. Obviously, we've seen this before, so I won't go through that in too much detail, but what I will do is just pass you back to Tom. Tom, do we have any questions at this stage?
Thanks, Phil. So we've actually had some feedback that some further guidance, or in fact a webinar on creating contexts would be helpful. I think you've got some context related content coming up though, haven't you, in this one?
Yeah, so in the controlling party we'll go through an example of creating context, but again, if that's something that you guys want to see in even more detail, then that is definitely something that we can look to produce in the future.
Okay, and also just a comment that from Alice is saying that adding tags to manually created additional notes, some further guidance on that would be welcome. We haven't got any questions as such at this stage, but I'll dive in and let you know when we do.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, if anyone wants any additional information on anything that we cover during today's webinar, or anything to do with tagging, then feel free to just drop a message in the question field, and we'll come back to you after the session. We'll get Les to come back to you and just drop you either a knowledge-based article, or we can get some more information from you as to what issues you're experiencing or what errors you see when you're producing this content. Now, at this stage, we're just going to go through an example of the controlling party. Now, within the controlling parties note, a lot of the error messages that we've already seen can arise again. So things like item over a specific period is related to a date. But what we're going to focus on is one that generally only ever appears in the controlling party note, and that is that the tagged item's value does not meet the length requirement specified for this taxonomy element. So all I'm going to do again is just open up a CaseWare file, and hopefully you guys should be able to see the CaseWare file on your screens at this point. And as you can see, we've got a pretty basic controlling party note. So we've got a parent undertakings, ultimate parent undertakings, and just a bit of information on the parent undertaking of the smallest group and the largest group. Now again, if I go through and generate the iXBRL, so for that to load up, I'm just going to save it as webinar part 2, webinar pat. And we can load up this error message. Now, where we see that the tagged item's value does not meet the length requirements, it's basically or essentially trying to tell you that the length of a tag doesn't match what CaseWare is expecting. So this could be, there's 2 examples. It can be where you've put information in a cell that CaseWare is expecting to be empty, or it's where you haven't put information in a cell that CaseWare is expecting to be populated. Now, this is a popular one for the controlling parties note, simply because when you tag the country of incorporation of the largest and smallest groups to consolidate, what CaseWare is actually expecting to see is a blank cell. Now, as you can see in the paragraph that we got for the smallest group, we've just got a cell and then we've got the United Kingdom. But for the largest group, we've actually put United Kingdom inside the cell, which is something that we see quite often in our support team. And what you'll notice is if I try and I can't resolve this issue whilst I'm trying to generate the iXBRL. So what you would need to do is completely cancel the submission, go back into your controlling party transactions note and actually remove the United Kingdom wording from that cell so that you've just got a blank cell, and then we can paste it alongside. Now, what we would be able to do with that cell, now, if anyone's not sure about cell creation and how cell calculations and things like that work, I would highly recommend you to take a look at our cell calculation webinar that we've done. Part 2 was last week. Part 1 was actually 3 weeks ago. It goes very much into details of creating cells and calculating cells. But what we'll actually do with this cell is make this so that it only displays and doesn't print. That way, when we go through and submit the iXBRL, the issue won't arise, but you won't get that large space that you can see at the moment that is as a result of that cell. So if I go through and generate the iXBRL at this stage, just go through and save or export the iXBRL. What you should see at this stage is that the error message will be removed. So this is quite common. In this case, it's because it was expecting a blank cell. And what we actually received was a cell that had text in it. Now, again, the opposite would be, as I said, if you've got a cell that needs to be populated that isn't showing any information on it. What we would always recommend, though, is that you double check the context that is being used in these circumstances. Simply removing the word United Kingdom may not always have or produce the desired result in terms of when you're going to submit this to Company's House. or HMRC. Now, if I close this quickly, and I'm just going to open up the fact sheet. So when you create or when you go through and generate the iXBRL, it produces a fact sheet, which is essentially just a long list of all the tags that are created. That should be loading onto your screen now. So this is an example of the CSV that's created. It has a big long list of all the tags on the left-hand side and the contexts and the information related to that context over this side. Now, if I go down and just search for a country in which the parent of the smallest group is incorporated, I'll just make that or highlight that in just a grey colour. As you can see here, our country in which parent of the smallest group is incorporated actually has the context United Kingdom on it. But if I show you quickly the country in which the largest group is incorporated, there isn't actually a context associated to it. So when I go through and submit this to HMRC, what you're actually going to be submitting is that there is actually no country of incorporation for the largest group incorporated. Now, the reason for that is we haven't applied the correct context within CaseWare. And as I said, simply removing the word United Kingdom will not always resolve the issue on the controlling party note. Now, if I go to Tools and iXBRL and Tags, this is where we can go through and have a look at the tag itself. Now, the tag is correct. It says country in which the parent of the largest group is incorporated. The issue is with the context. The context is the active period. But within that context of active period, there is no mention of the United Kingdom. The context doesn't say that this is a UK entity. Now, the reason why you have to create these contexts for the different countries of incorporation is simply because it could be any country. The smallest or the largest group could be incorporated in Qatar, it could be in Ireland, it could be Germany, France, anywhere in the world. But CaseWare doesn't create the individual context for each country, just because otherwise that's another, there's over 200 recognized countries in the UN. That'd be another 200 tags that you guys would have to go through and try and find the correct one. So what you would need to do on each, or for the largest group, is just create your own context, which you can do by right clicking and on the tag and selecting new dimensional context. Now this will load up the edit dimensions screen. And as you can see here, the primary item is the country in which the parent of the largest group is incorporated. So that is automatically selected based on the tag that I've right clicked on. And if I go down to the countries and regions, this is where I can go through and select the appropriate country that my company has been incorporated in. So I'm going to select the United Kingdom and just click OK. Now at this stage, you want to give a little bit more detail for your context. Now, as you can see, we've already got one for the country, the smallest group, but I'm just going to call this country of the largest group and call this active period. Now, in creating your own dimensional context, as you said, the name, it could be any name that you want it to be. Just normally something that you want that you will be able to recognize on each year. And the only other thing you would need to do is just copy the scheme and identifier from another tag. Now these are always the same regardless of what the file that you're in. So if I go through the different tags, you'll notice that the scheme and identifier is exactly the same every single time. I can then click OK, and we've got the tag that we created. It will be within the context list, so I can go to the drop down and it'll always be at the bottom. So any context you create will appear at the bottom of the list, and I'll just select country of the largest group, active period, and click OK. Now if I go through and generate the iXBRL, I'll quickly go through this. what we should see once this has gone through and generated, so if I view all the facts, so now where we've got country in which the parent largest group is incorporated is now showing the correct context with the United Kingdom. Okay, so just to reiterate, whilst it's important that the tag is correct and blank, it's also important that you go through and apply the correct context to the tag to make sure that when you're submitting these to HMRC in Companies House, you don't receive any messages. They don't come back to you and say, oh, you haven't tagged an actual country as the largest group, or where the largest group has been incorporated. All I'm going to do at this stage is just again hand you back to Tom, and once again, Tom, do you have any questions at this stage?
Thanks, Phil. We don't have anything else at the moment, so please, if anybody's got any questions, don't be shy. You've got the question field there in the control panel. You can also ask a question live via your microphone, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Or if you wanted to just quickly pop something in the question field now, then we can fire that to Phil before we go to the next section of the webinar. Otherwise, I think I'll be very quickly handing it straight back to you, Phil.
Yep, no problem, Tom. If you do, as Tom said, if anyone's got any questions, Les is on hand to tackle all of your pressing tagging questions. So please feel free to drop them in the question field for him. Now, the final area we're just going to look at is just the subsidiary undertakings. So we're going to look at these again, some of the examples of the tags. So is not dimensionally valid is probably the most popular one, or the most common one on the subsidiary undertakings note. Now, if I open up a CaseWare file, just wait for that to load in on your screens. Just check that you guys can see that. Yep. Okay. So the reason why I mentioned at the start the subsidiary undertakings is different from the rest of the custom content that we've already looked at is the fact that the main table that you can see, so where we've got Sean Ridgway Limited, Maidstone House Limited, that table is automatically tagged by CaseWare. So any information or any information you insert into this table will always be automatically tagged. It's only where you go through and you want to insert additional information that you need to go through and start manually tagging content on subsidiary undertakings. So in this example, Sean Ridgway Limited, we've said see below, and we've got a little paragraph that says the company owns 100% of Class A shares, 100% Class B, 100% Class C. And because we've inserted that into the text area below, that text area will not be automatically tagged because it's additional information on top of CaseWare standard table. And that is where you can go through and start to experience some alternative tagging errors when you're going to submit your accounts to HMRC or Companies House. So all I've gone through at this stage is just gone through and generated iXBRL so we can look at the errors that I've mentioned. Now, the first one, tagged item, is numeric, however, a unit of measure has not been assigned. Pretty much the same as what we've already seen. Just to recap, this relates to 100, and we've got a numeric of no units of measure. Now, this one's slightly different. We're not going to have reporting currency as the numeric. We're actually just going to select percentage, and we're going to click OK. So again, if you've got anything that's related to a percentage, just make sure that the numeric is selected correctly as percentage. Now, our next message, percentage of class of shares held in subsidiary is not dimensionally valid. Now, if I click correct on this one, you might notice the percentage of class of shares. So the tag is correct. We've got the percentage now because we just inserted that because of the last message. But the issue in this case is to do with the context. Now, this is the first subsidiary, and we are related to the active period. They are correct. But because we've got different types of shares, so we've got Class A, Class B, and Class C, so we've got 3 different types of shares, we actually need additional information as to what type of shares this relates to. Now, within the context, CaseWare has automatically created the first two types of subsidiary shares for each of the first 30 subsidiaries. So if I scroll down, keep scrolling, eventually you'll see sub 30 active period, sub 30 active period subsidiary shares 1 and sub 30 active period subsidiary shares 2. Now, if it's the case that you've got more than one subsidiary shares for any subsidiary, that is where you need to go through and use the breakdown between subsidiary shares 1, subsidiary shares 2, etc. So if I select, in this case, this is our first subsidiary shares, so we want to make sure that our context is sub 1 active period subsidiary shares 1. And if I change that context and click OK, that will clear that error. Now, with the 100% and Class B, that would obviously be subsidiary shares or subsidiary 1, active period subsidiary shares 1. And our Class B would be subsidiary 2, subsidiary shares, or sorry, subsidiary 1, subsidiary shares 2. So if I go down to the next error message, this one's simply exactly the same, but instead of percentage, it's the description of class of shares. And as you can see, the context is incorrect, so we just need to change that to active period subsidiary shares 1. Just wait for that to load in, and we can head on to the next message, which, there we go. So the next one is simply 100%. Now, again, I granted we've already seen this. All I need to do is change the numeric to percentage. The only reason we're highlighting this is just to show you that the context for this one is sub 1 active period subsidiary shares 2. And what you would need to do is, because we've got 100% of Class C, that is where you'd need to go through and create your own third subsidiary shares context, which again, unfortunately, because of the timing restrictions today, we won't have time to go through and create that context. But again, if there's something you guys want to see in more detail on another webinar, then we can devote an entire webinar just to going through and creating dimensional contexts. And our final error message is completely unrelated to the subsidiary undertakings note. I just wanted to show you this just because it's, if I close that quickly, the tagged items value does not correspond to the data type of the taxonomy element. It's very similar to the one we saw within the controlling parties. The only difference is in this example, as you can see, there's an empty cell that CaseWare is expecting to be populated. So in this example, you would just need to go through and insert the date. And in this example is the end date for the director's report. So within the completion section, just make sure you inserted the completion dates for the accounts. If you have an example where you have only created 2 subsidiary shares, or you only use CaseWare standard 2 subsidiary shares, but you've actually tagged 3 like we have here, so we've got 100% for Class C, this is where you're likely to see errors or warning messages to say that different values are found for the same tag. So in this example, Class B and Class C have both been tagged using the subsidiary shares 2. That's why you need to go through and create a third subsidiary shares context. Otherwise, you're going to receive just a warning message to say that you're using the same value on multiple tags. So you would need to go through at this stage and I would close completely the iXBRL submission, go through and create the appropriate context for that third subsidiary shares. What we'll do, if anyone wants any guidance on that in the short run, please feel free to drop a message in the question field and I'll get something sent over to you. We've got plenty of content on creating context within our knowledge base, and also and we can also upload that to our YouTube channel. Now, I'm wary about the time that we have left. Obviously, I haven't had any questions on the first two sections, but just in case, we want to obviously leave plenty of time for the Q&A. So Tom, back to you. Do you have any questions at this stage?
Hi Phil. Yes, so we did. There has been a question that's come in. I think that Les is going to go and gather some more information, but I'll put it to you anyway, just in case you have any insight that you can offer live. So it's about post balance sheet events. So the question is about post balance sheet events. When tagging this note, a note relating to those events, event after reporting date, and the context cannot be just active period. Could you explain why?
That, as far as I'm aware, and again, like Les said, we'll get some additional details on that. As far as I'm aware, it's because the post-balance sheet event relates to an event which isn't actually, obviously, where the post-balance sheet, the balance sheet is the end of the period that we're reporting on. So essentially, it's the end of the active period. Now, if there's a post-balance sheet event that occurs after the balance sheet date, essentially, it's not the active period, it's after the active period. So that's why you wouldn't be able to use the active period context. Now, as to what context or what context I would use or would recommend you use, I'm not 100% sure on that. So what we'll do is we'll go to our compliance team, we'll do a little bit of digging, and we'll come back to you just to make sure that you're aware of what the correct context to use would be.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Phil. So we are, that's it for the questions that we have in at the moment. Okay, while we do the wrap up over the next couple of minutes, you can please feel free to pop the questions in, and we might be able to squeeze on in before we finish. If not, then you can still continue to log them, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. You'll also have an opportunity during the feedback survey at the end to put any questions in there, so we can get back to you after the session. So I think we'll move on to the last few slides. So we've got, just confirming here, that we've got our past webinars on the knowledge base. So when we record them, they always go up on the knowledge base. Nearly muted myself there. They always go up on the knowledge base, but we are also in the process of uploading those to our YouTube channel. So you can go to CaseWare Client Services, CaseWare UK Client Services on YouTube, subscribe there, so you'll be notified when we have new videos. If there isn't one on there that you'd like to be on there, then of course let us know. We're in the process of uploading those. In terms of webinars that are coming up, our schedule is evolving all the time, but this is our upcoming webinars at the moment. To keep up to date with those, you can go to the events page of our website, which is caseware.co.uk/events. And you can also go to our LinkedIn channel, which is, again, CaseWare UK Client Services. And if you follow us there, then we usually post about webinars that are coming up to give you a bit of notice to sign up and attend. We have got a question come in, so I'm just going to double check.
Just make sure that Les hasn't responded already.
Do you get many questions as a result of accounts being submitted to HMRC or Companies House? So in terms of, I guess, post-submission errors, that might be something that we need to follow up on after the session and get some detail over to you.
Yeah, that might be something we need to check with our support team.
Yeah.
It's not something that I personally have seen appear too often, but we'll get some detail on that, and then we'll go back to you. Just on the webinars, everyone, I would highly recommend the Note Builder Advanced refresher webinar. It is something that you guys as a clients are using a lot more now, the Note Builder tool, and we're going to just go through various examples. We've also, as part of the signing up for that webinar, we're sending out a questionnaire just to get an idea of what you guys used the Note Builder for. So any feedback on what you guys use Note Builder for would be highly appreciated, just to help us improve our content that we have available for you.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. So yeah, so that's at the end of the month, the Note Builder refresher. We also got the Note Builder Advanced Getting Started guide, which is on the knowledge base. So that'll give you an overview if you want to, if you're getting started. So that really brings us to the end of the session today. Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoy the rest of your day and have a good weekend. Take care, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah, cheers. Thank you, everyone.